Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the Local Review Body for the 16th of September 2024. Before we start, let me do some introductions. I'm Councillor Bob Braun. I am the convener of the Local Review Body, and I'm joined today by my two colleagues. To my left, Baillie Mike Williamson, and to my right, Baillie Claire McLaren. Further to my right is Mrs. Leslie Tierney. Mrs. Tierney is an independent planning advisor who has had no previous contact with these properties or these applications until they were put forward for appeal and onto the agenda today. To my left, beyond Baillie Mike Williamson, is Mr. Jeff Fogg, who's our legal advisor for this afternoon, and beyond him, our Democratic Governance Officer, Mr. Danny Williams. So we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is declarations of interest. May I ask members, do we have any declarations of interest? Baillie Mike Williamson and Baillie McLaren.
None from me either.
Fine, and I have none either, so that's fine. Thank you. Next item is to approve the minute of the last meeting. As I was the only member present on that meeting, I am happy to approve those. So we're through that part. So we now move on to the full agenda today, which is our applications. And the first one we have to deal with is number 4.1, which is the siting of an ancillary accommodation unit in retrospect at the Walled Garden, Garth, Fontingell, Aberfeldy. And Mrs. Tierney, if you would like to introduce this case for us. Thank you.
Thank you, convener. We'll just go through some of the slides first. So location of the appeal site, as you can see there, just to the east of Fontingell at Garth, just to the north of Kenmore. Next slide, please. And then zooming in on the site, a number of other properties accessed from the main road up the hillside. And then zooming in again, you can see that the square is effectively the walled garden, the dwelling house that goes with the walled garden at the top of the hill there, utilising the garden walls. And the pod is where the arrow indicates. You can probably just see the outline of the top of it there, just at the bottom of the garden. And then this is the application site, so the property application site boundary and curtilage of the property highlighted there in red, and the black square at the bottom there is where the ancillary unit is located. Next slide. And then these are the elevational drawings and the floor plans of the unit, timber clad, and the metro tile roof. Next slide, please. So some photographs. This is the, I think it's the C448 road, and one of the accesses into the properties at Garth. Next slide, please. And then as you come along the road towards that access, as you can see, a lot of heavy tree cover, so you don't really see a lot of the dwelling houses. You can probably just make out two there, just where the yellow arrow is, and the walled garden property and the pod are located kind of within the trees where that arrow is. Next slide, please. And then as you come up to the application site, obviously the roads within here are just tracks basically to each of the individual houses, but you can just see the pod there on the right hand side where the arrow is. And then this is looking from the other end of the track back towards the entrance to the property where the pod's located. So it's basically in behind that hedge and where those trees are. That steps on the left hand side there lead to a building which belongs to one of the other houses, which has been converted to holiday let accommodation. Next slide, please. So this is some more images of the pod. So the access road up to the house comes in off the track and leads up the hill, and the pod there is just off to the left. And then the photo on the right is the rear view of the pod within the trees just beside the wall there of the wall. Next slide. And then this is looking from the pod back towards the building, which I just said there is the holiday accommodation unit associated with one of the other properties. Next slide. And then just another couple of images of it as you come into the property, and you can see the wall there. Next slide. And then this is now looking from the top of the site where the house is, back down across the garden towards where the pod is located. So the left-hand one there, you can just see the roof of the pod where the yellow arrow is. And then on the right-hand side there, just behind the wall, you can just see the roof of the pod there as well. And again, just another couple of images looking down towards where the pod's located at the bottom of the wall garden. And then this is from the bottom of the garden looking back up at the dwelling house, just to give you an understanding of the scale and the location of the property at the top of the garden there. Okay. So by way of introduction and background to the appeal, as you've seen there, the walled garden is a character dwelling house which once served as the walled garden to Garth House. The property is located around 1.5 kilometres northeast of Fortingall and within the Loch Tay local landscape area. The property can be accessed via private tracks connecting to the C448 road to the south and southeast. The application seeks planning permission to regularise the retrospective siting of an ancillary accommodation unit and associated works within the property's curtilage, but just out with the walled garden. The reasons for refusal were firstly that approval would be contrary to MPF 4 Policy 14A, where the proposal is designed in such a way that does not improve the quality of the area, and B, the resultant design by virtue of its siting, positioning and disconnected relationship from the main dwelling house would not provide positive ancillary function, impact on attractive and welcome surroundings, impact on ancillary legibility on approach to the main dwelling house, diminishes a sense of domestic place in being out of place and context, inconsistent with the pleasant and distinctive qualities of a successful place, and Clause C, Policy 16 Criteria G1, where the proposal forms no ancillary relationship with the main dwelling house and has a detrimental visual amenity impact in terms of its positioning. Secondly, approval would be contrary to the Perth and Kinross LDP 2 Policies 1A, where the proposal siting does not respect the established character, amenity and sense of place, is inappropriate to the local context, and Clause 1B with particular note to Criteria A, where it impacts on the established sense of place. B, it does not fully appreciate its elevated position and visual impact implications due to site topography and against the character of the area. And D, presents inappropriate siting and positioning on approach to the property, does not respect the original structure's established built lines, and does not appropriately correlate as ancillary to the main dwelling house, as informed by placemaking supplementary guidance and ancillary and annex accommodation supplementary guidance. So in terms of the assessment by the planning service, the introduction of ancillary buildings are generally considered to be acceptable in principle, in appropriate locations and function to the host property. Nevertheless, consideration must be given to the association, scale, form, massing, design, position, proportions and external finishes of the proposed development within the context of the application site and whether it would have an adverse impact upon visual, residential or environmental amenity. In this instance, the proposal is considered inappropriate due to concerns with the proposal's physical and visual separation from the main dwelling house and its localised visual impact on approach to the dwelling house at an elevated position. There are no residential amenity concerns. So in terms of the appeal case from the applicant, they refer to various inaccurate advice from the agent and builder and initial advice from planning that the need for the application related to the walled garden being listed and that it constituted a dwelling house. The applicant believes that an application for a certificate of lawfulness could have been submitted instead. The EcoPod is not a dwelling house as it provides ancillary accommodation for the existing house, and it has never been the intention to use it in any other way. Planning officers have admitted that they've not been consistent in their handling of planning applications within the immediate vicinity. With regard to reason for refusal, number 1, this indicates that it does not comply with MPF 4 and in particular Policy 14. This is a small domestic structure in the garden of a modest house in rural Perthshire. Is this unacceptable because it has fallen foul of the country's principal strategic planning document? It states that the proposal does not improve the quality of the area and does not provide positive ancillary function, and they've questioned what that means. With regard to reason for refusal 2, firstly, with regard to the view that the development does not respect the established character and amenity of the area, the Planning Service actually state that the ecopod is modest, limited in scale and low in height. Additionally, the character of the properties within Garth are different from each other, ranging from Gothic to modern, varying in construction, materials and size, not typically Scottish in style, nor aspire to a common design. The diversity of builds in Garth is arguably its established character. The Planning Service notes that the property is atypical to that of a standard dwelling house curtilage, which is true of almost every property here to some degree, and is not grounds for refusing permission, or there would still only be a handful of houses in Garth. The established amenity is questionable when the area comprises a significant proportion of second homes, rentals, and Airbnb and new build plots. In addition, what has or has not been established does not necessarily define what is best going forward. The ecopod does nothing to disrespect the area. It does not seek to change its function or cause any harm. Secondly, with regard to the impact on the established sense of place, the Planning Service notes the scale and mass is absorbed into the wider landscape with negligible impact and does not affect the special qualities or objectives of the Loch Tay local landscape area. Sitting very comfortably within the boundary of a private garden, reflecting well the wooded surrounds, it is not evident how the ecopod could be considered to negatively impact on the sense of place. Thirdly, with regard to its elevated position and consequential visual impact, it's unfathomable what is meant by elevated, as the whole area of Garth is on a hill, with each property either above or below its neighbours. The existing house in the walled garden has least visual impact of all, being the only single height property and set well back from the shared driveway by a private driveway of several metres. The pod itself sits on the ground and is not elevated. The considerable distance from other properties and the shared driveway plus the numerous trees and bushes means there is negligible, if at all, line of sight from outside our boundary. Indeed, the Planning Service confirms there is mutual privacy to neighbouring properties. Finally, with regard to the development not relating well to the approach to the house and it not being seen as ancillary, the Planning Service notes that we have justified its siting within the curtilage of our property, that is our rear garden, sitting very comfortably within its plot. They also note there are no visual concerns on approach to the property and minimal impact to the overall setting. Just in terms of other matters, a number of objections to the application state that the development is unsightly, overlooks other properties, detracts from the listed Garth House, does not comply with planning guidance. It is a scenic and environmentally sensitive area. It should be closer to the house, light pollution, precedent and concerns about foul drainage. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll move on to questions. Bailey Williamson.
Yeah, just one question, just picking up on your photographs, and the elevated nature of the pod. From when I saw it, you turned into the drive and it was basically sat above your drive, and it felt just a little bit in your face. Well, I accept that. Also, I'm trying to get to a question here. Garth is split into kind of three kind of distinct zones in the sense of you've got the new developments and then you've got the older developments. Would that be a reasonable statement to make?
Yes, Councillor, I would say from my impression of the area was that there was a variety of zones, characters, not all immediately evident. There's a lot of trees, a lot of screening round about that area. So it's not immediately obvious what the exact character of the area is, but you might have a different view.
Bailey McLaren, any questions?
It's more a question of surrounding the ancillary to the property, and the paper suggests that it would only ever be used as ancillary accommodation for the main residents. Is that something that we can ensure if we were minded, if this was minded to pass, that we can add as a condition?
Yes, it would be quite normal for an application for ancillary domestic accommodation to have a condition that limits it to only that use, and also that essentially stops the property being subdivided into separate planning and residential units as well.
I have a couple of questions, if I may. First of all, the services, the water, electric, they're all independent of the house, I understand. Is that correct?
Yes, and then they're private as well.
And the other point which you mentioned and was raised is this question of NPF4 and LDP2. I understand it's just a small application for a very small item, but just to clarify, they still apply to all applications.
Yes, convener. National Planning Framework 4 is obviously the national planning framework. It applies across the whole of Scotland. So even if a development is very minor in scale, those policies would still have to be taken into account. I mean, in this case, it's the general overarching policy about quality of the 6 qualities of good development, essentially.
Mr. Fogg, did you want to come?
Yeah, I was going to say very much the same, convener. Despite NPF4 being a national planning framework and national strategy, it has been drafted in a way that some of the rather more specific and particular policies that had formerly been found within a local development plan only will now be sourced in NPF4, and you'll find some of them dropping out of the local development plan. So notwithstanding its national status, it does have some particular for small scale proposals such as this.
Thank you for that. So members, we have no further questions. Yep, Bailey Williamson.
Thank you. It's just picking up on the question Bill McLaren asked about the conditioning. I take it if we did put that, does that block the applicant from coming back at a later date and basically asking for that condition to be removed if necessary?
Yes, sorry. Yeah, yes, we were both eager to say there's nothing that can stop an applicant seeking to vary an existing consent, but they would have to come back and do it on a planned basis with a further application or a Section 42 variation.
Thank you. Okay, so members, with questions over, may I ask then, can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information put before us? That is the information contained in the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we need more information? Bailey Williamson.
Yes, happy to proceed.
And Bailey McLaren.
Happy to proceed.
Okay, fine. So Bailey Williamson, would you like to start us off, please?
Yes, I would like to refuse the application on the grounds outlined in the report from officers. Having seen the site, I do believe that the structure is quite imposing, and therefore, as I say, I believe it's. I would like to refuse.
Thank you very much. I'll come in next if I may. Obviously, ecopods have their place, there's no doubt about that, and they are usually unobtrusive, but I think I'd have to agree with you on this occasion that this one does stand out quite a lot from the entrance. I know the applicant is concerned about the way the process was proceeded with planning officers. That is not a matter for us to discuss here. That's a matter for him to take up elsewhere. We've also heard, of course, that NPF4 and LDP2 do play a part in the planning process, although the applicant seems to feel this is over the top for what he was looking for. As far as this application is concerned, I say I think this is an imposing site for this pod, although normally they fit in quite comfortably. Much is made of the fact that this is ancillary accommodation, and I think the crux of that is that it seems to be that in this case it is, for two reasons, too far from the house, for my liking, to be classed as ancillary, and obviously it has its independent services. If it had services fed from the main property, I think that would be a slightly different story. But in this instance, I don't think you can class it as ancillary. It needs to be much closer to the house if that is the reason for it being there. I know the applicant said it's difficult, but these pods can be moved relatively easily. They can be broken down and transported. So I think the answer here is to move it closer to the house. Therefore, it would be ancillary accommodation and can be taken as such. So again, like Bailey Williamson, I'm going to refuse the appeal. Bailey McLaren.
Thank you, convener. I have to concur with yourself and Bailey Williamson. The issue that the pod doesn't improve the quality of the area, that's maybe slightly more debatable, but as you've pointed out, the distance from the property gives a suggestion it may not be ancillary. The reasoning 2D presents inappropriate siting and positioning on approach to the property. It is very dominant. There is no getting away from that, and I would support the decision made by the officers.
Thank you. So, Mr. Fogg, we have a unanimous decision to refuse the appeal. Okay, thank you. Members, we'll now move on to item 4.2. This appeal is a change of use from flat to short-term let unit in retrospect at 2 Burnham Terrace in Burnham and Dunkeld. Mrs. Tierney, if you could introduce for us.
Thank you, convener. So the first slide here is the location of the property. So obviously Dunkeld and then Burnham here. So the yellow star indicates the location of the property there. And then as we zoom in, this kind of courtyard there with the properties just surrounding it, and it's just where the star is. Next slide. And then this is one of the application drawings, so surrounding area and the site just highlighted in red there in the middle of the screen. And then just zooming in on the property, numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 as you go along. Number 3 on the ground floor, number 2 upstairs there. So then some photographs, and then this is as you look down the street there at Burnham Terrace. So although you're just outside, just coming off another road where there's a number of different types of uses, this street is predominantly residential or indeed all residential, apart from on the corner there, that white property was, I believe, the former Maryburn Hotel, and it is used for holiday letting purposes. So where the yellow arrow is where the property is. Next slide. And then as you look at the front of the property, the door that leads to it, and then the upper floor of the 3-bedroom property. Next slide. And then this is looking back up the private lane, if you like. So the property again on the left-hand side there. Next slide. And then this is as you come into the courtyard at the back of the property, so where the yellow arrow is, it's kind of up in the corner there. All the backs of the properties do overlook this courtyard area. People can park in there as well as on the streets round about. Next slide. And then this is the door to the property, just on the left there, so you can see where the stairs would go upstairs, and the door and the key box just outside the door there as well. And then that's looking in the opposite direction. There's a pend that leads through to here off the street. That's how you gain access by cars. Next slide. And then just a couple of images of kind of what's round about. Small industrial estate just to the south here towards the A9 and the railway line, and Arts Centre. Some other shops and services, and on-street parking just round the corner. Next slide. Okay. So yes, property is a first floor 3-bed flat at 2 Burnham Terrace, which is C listed. It's in the conservation area to the east of Station Road. There's no defined town centre in Burnham. but the site is predominantly residential and part of a terrace of properties where those are all, as you can see, in quite close proximity to each other. The flat is accessed from Burnham Terrace, where the front door leads directly from the street into a hallway that is served by stairs to the first floor flat. The stairwell is also accessible from the rear, from a courtyard area shared by around 20 properties. Dunkeld Burnham is in an area of housing pressure and identified for a possible short-term let control area if the council is minded to pursue these. So the reasons for refusal: firstly, the proposal is contrary to MPF 4 Policy 14C, Design Quality in Place, and Perth and Kinross LDP 2 Policies 1A, Placemaking, and Policy 17D, Residential Areas, as the short-term let accommodation would adversely impact on the amenity of neighbouring residents, and the short-term let use would not be compatible with the amenity and character of the surrounding residential area. Secondly, the proposed retrospective change of use is contrary to Policy 30E, Tourism of MPF 4, as the proposal would result in, firstly, an unacceptable impact on local amenity and character of the area, and secondly, the loss of residential accommodation where such loss is not outweighed by demonstrable local economic benefits. So in terms of the assessment by the Planning Service, the primary policy in this instance is MPF 4 Policy 30E, Tourism, as there is no specific LDP2 policies relating to short-term let accommodation, particularly changes of use of existing properties. LDP2 Placemaking, Policy 1A and 17 residential areas have relevance and seek to protect or improve residential amenity, ensure that proposals respect the character and amenity of a place. Specifically, MPF 4 30E states that development proposals for the reuse of existing buildings for short-term lets will not be supported where the proposal will result in an unacceptable impact on local amenity or the character of a neighbourhood, or the loss of residential accommodation where such loss is not outweighed by demonstrable economic benefits. Perth and Kinross Council non-statutory planning guidance on the change of use of residential property to short-term lets was adopted in November last year. This guidance seeks to address concerns over the impact of STLs on services, local business, staffing and expansion, as well as housing affordability. The guidance acknowledges that while short-term lets can bring economic benefits to the host and local areas, this must be balanced against the impact the loss of that residential property has on the availability of housing for local people, and in particular access to affordable housing. Consideration 6 of this guidance is relevant as it pertains to the potential loss of residential accommodation and whether the change of use will be outweighed by the benefit to the local economy. The Local Housing Strategy 2022 to 27 includes an action to develop planning policy through the LDP3 where appropriate for STL control areas. The property to which this application refers falls within the area that has been consulted on as a potential short-term let control area, where the number of short-term lets may be impacting on the availability of appropriate housing for local residents. In respect of Criteria 1 of MPF 4 Policy 30E, the proposed use of the property as a short-term let would not be significantly different from a flat in terms of its physical appearance, the extent of guest footfall or noise emanating from the property, so long as good management is in place. However, the high turnover of guests would likely be higher than typical private rented or owner-occupied accommodation, and this could have an impact on noise and disturbance to neighbours and may contribute to a cumulative adverse impact on the residential character of the area. In respect of Criteria 2 of MPF 4 Policy E, the proposal would result in the loss of a residential flat to short-term let accommodation, where the number of short-term lets may be impacting on the availability of residential accommodation for local people. While there will be some economic benefits, such as from the custom of guests to businesses in the area, these do not outweigh the loss of residential accommodation in this instance. In terms of roads and access, although the application form referred to there being one parking space associated with the property, this is not defined on the plans, and parking in the area is generally informal as there is limited space and the nature of the area does not easily lend itself to formation of dedicated parking spaces. The road is in a poor state of maintenance and there are no footways. However, the site is within convenient distance of public transport options in the form of bus stops on Perth Road and Burnham Railway Station. In these respects, it accords with MPF Policy 13, Sustainable Transport, and LDP2 Policy 60B. So the applicant, in terms of their case, they've noted the following points in support of their appeal: that a licence for an STL has been granted, that the refusal is flawed because there is a false presumption that the council is powerless to take remedial action to avoid any effects. There have only been 12 STL applications since 2019, but there are many that operate without permission. A balance must be struck between supporting tourism and loss of housing for local people. No assessment has been made about how many STLs there are or how many can be sustained. The wider issue relates to inadequate local housing supply, which is equally relevant in impacting upon housing availability. That support should be given to STLs in sustainable locations, and this is near the railway station. There are no complaints from neighbours after 2 years of operation. There are other examples where STLs have been approved nearby, and one has a communal entrance. The property was once part of the Maryburn Hotel in tourist use. There will be again to the, and there is a personal statement from the applicant that goes along with it as well. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I'm going to move on to questions. Bailey McLaren.
Thank you. I actually don't have any questions, convener.
Bailey Williamson.
Yes, I have several questions. My first question is I'm wondering if this area that the short-term let has been applied for is actually a commercial or designated as a commercial area or residential area.
So in terms of the local plan, Dunkeld and Burnham has a defined settlement boundary. It's only Dunkeld itself that has a defined town centre where you would expect to find a mix of uses, commercial and residential. So anything out with the town centre but within the settlement boundary is essentially whatever the character of that area is. And this has been assessed as being this particular road or street is predominantly residential in nature, albeit that just round the corner there are other uses.
Possible to go back, because ask more questions. Thank you. Is it possible to go back to the plan with the numbers of the buildings on? You mentioned at that point there was a mixture of short-term lets and residential properties in that, and I've just put on the assessor's site and I can only find 2 properties that have got short-term let status, which is number 10 and obviously number 2. So I take it the rest of that street therefore is entirely residential accommodation then?
Yeah, I think that's a fair understanding. The property on the corner, which was the former Maryburn Hotel, that has been converted to short-term lets, but obviously it had a hotel use previously, so it's not too different in character, but
Thank you.
I have no questions myself. So members, given that circumstance, can we now proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us? That is the information contained in the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? Bailey McLaren.
Happy to proceed.
And Bailey Williamson.
Happy to proceed.
And I too am happy to proceed. So Bailey McLaren, would you like to start us off on this one?
Thank you. I am actually in favour of upholding the officer's decisions here. The applicant has purchased this property for their own use for their reasons for employment. It wasn't, so therefore the area is residential. That is a residential reasoning for purchasing the property, and therefore I see that it should remain as residential.
Thank you. Bailey Williamson.
Unfortunately, I'm of the opinion that we should uphold the appeal. I feel that whilst I understand that the people's concerns. I feel there is a lack of a control zone within there. It was mentioned a couple of times within the presentation, but there is no control zone, which gives us additional powers. So unfortunately, I'm going to uphold the appeal.
Thank you both.
Sorry, can I just, you would uphold the review application
That's correct.
and grant approval?
Grant approval. Thank you.
Thank you. So it leaves it with me, I'm afraid, on this occasion. As with all these cases, it's residential amenity, which is the core of a decision. And it's important to note, I think, in this case, that the Burnham appeal case, which went to the reporter, was dated in September 23, and the non-statutory guidance that we operate on is November 23. And the examples that the applicant puts forward all predate that. So, of course, we can't be sure how that would be looked at in today's light. The applicant or the application papers contain various comments by the planning advisor regarding how the council should look at these cases. That may be fair enough, but it's not a matter for us to determine here. There is mention, of course, again of the appeal through the reporter, and the applicant seems to be of the opinion that because there's no objections in this case, the material consideration of that should be lessened. I'm afraid I don't agree. There are various points raised in the appeal which are pertinent. We mentioned our own LDP policy 17D, which does accept the view of tourism and that there should be work done to increase that. However, it does make it clear that tourism must be compatible with the amenity and character of the area. There's also mentioned the fact there have been no objections in this case, but the appeal does mention again that the lack of any complaint of antisocial behaviour should not in itself be a recognition that it doesn't apply. The exact wording I will give you for that, so that we know where we're going. It does say, however, impacts on amenity and character are not limited to recorded incidences of antisocial behaviour. And it also mentioned, of course, that there may be management in place for these properties, but that in itself also doesn't guarantee that there's amenity and that amenity may not be harmed. And of course, it's the intensification of movement, which is the important item here. Changing guests, changing cars, parking is also a problem. And therefore, on this occasion, I am going to refuse the appeal and uphold the decision of the officers. Thank you. So, Mr. Fogg, we have a majority decision on this occasion. Thank you, members. We'll now move on to the next item of the day, which is now number 4.3. This is the erection of a fence for a temporary period at 2 Greenacres, Grange, Errol, Perth. Mrs. Tierney, if you could introduce this one.
Thank you, convener. So location of the property there at Grange to the northeast of Errol. And as we zoom in there, the properties at Grange, and then the application site where the star is there, underneath that is actually the former poultry farm where the houses have now been developed. Next slide. Then this is the application drawing, so the red line around the house on the plot, and the blue line along the edge there was the where the fence was originally proposed. So this is the detailed site plan as the application was originally submitted. So again, as you can see, the site outlined in red. And then on the road side, to the top side of the slide there, the blue line indicates the application as originally submitted for the 38.5 metre long fence, and then the return down the east side of the plot of 12.5 metres. Next slide. And then this is the plan as it was amended to, further to discussions with the planning service. And as you can see now, a reduction in the length of the fence along the roadside to 13 metres, and the return of 12.5 metres still remaining on the east side of the property. Next slide, please. Just some details of the fence, typical 1.8 metre high vertical timber fence. Next slide. So some photographs which really just give an overall impression of the development more than anything, and then some specific slides of the property itself. It's on the right hand side there, where that yellow arrow is the front of the property that fronts onto the road, the main road. Next slide, please. Then as you head east, it's at the far end of the development. So there's one house on one side of the entrance, which is the closest one you can see there, one on the other side of the entrance, and then the property in question here on the other side of that. What this drawing or photograph shows you is the extensive fencing that exists to outside plot number 8. That one was the house that's closest to you, which run along the entire boundary of that property with the main road. Footpath and bus stops were part of the overall approval there as well. Next slide, please. And then just some images of the development, really to give you an impression of what we have here in terms of style and design, varying boundary treatments. So both along the properties or along the frontage of the site, along the main road, and also in between plots. So a mixture of post and wire fencing, some 1.8 metre fencing as well. These are all internal within the site itself. Next slide. So again, on the left there is some 1.8 metre fencing. On the right, we've got some more post and wire fencing. Okay, so these are just some other images that the planning service had taken of the site. So this is from the garden of the property as it bounds the main road there. Next slide. Image. And then this would be where the fence would be located along the roadside, and then the return to the side. And then I think the alternative position of the fence that was shown there is something that was possibly being looked at by the planning service to set the fence back from the road slightly. Audrey, as a matter of interest, do you have the site plan of the original approval that was inserted into that presentation? Yes, that one. Okay. So this just gives you the background to what was approved as part of the original 8-house development. So again, as you've seen in the photos, the 3 houses that front the road to either side of the access, and then the application site. And the site plan key there is all the the different finishes for the hard surfacing and the fencing and the soft landscaping and so on. And it's probably just worth pointing out that the image of the large fence at plot 8, which is the one to the top left, was shown on that approved landscaping drawing. So by way of introduction, the application site relates to number 2, Green Acres, which is a recently completed dwelling house forming part of an 8-dwelling house development at the former Errol Poultry Farm site. The application seeks permission to erect a 1.8 metre high fence for a temporary period bounding the property's northeast corner. The application originally sought the erection of a permanent full-length fence, 38.5 metres long on the northern boundary with a 12.5 metre return, 1.8 metres high with cap rail and 20 mm gap between front and rear slats. The first revision offset the fence 3 metres back from the established plot boundary line to allow for the approved cycle path. However, concerns remained about the resultant disjointed boundary line, severed garden space creation and the subsequent boundary precedent that would be set. The design option was later clarified as a temporary solution whilst allowing for the approved natural hedge boundaries and planting to continue to grow and mature, resulting in the much desired natural screening for amenity and privacy. The final design is for a 13-metre long fence along the road with a 12.5-metre return, and for it to be a temporary 5-year period to allow screening, security and privacy, again whilst the approved natural boundaries established. So the reasons for refusal are firstly that approval would be contrary to NPF 4 Policy 14A, where the proposal is designed in such a way that does not improve the quality of the area, and B, where it would detract from the natural landscape and the approved scheme's visual connection and attractive and welcoming surroundings. It would be of a detail and finish that erodes an intended sense of place and legibility, and it would erode natural positive biodiversity solutions inconsistent with the pleasant, connected, distinctive and sustainable qualities of a successful place. And C, Policy 16 Criteria G1, where the proposal would have a detrimental impact on the character and environmental quality of the surrounding area in terms of design. And secondly, approval would be contrary to the Perth and Kinross LDP 2 Policy 1A, where the development would not contribute positively to the surrounding or approved scheme's natural environment and would not respect existing character and amenity by virtue of its design. Policy 1B, with particular note to Criteria A, where the proposal would erode a coherent boundary and sense of place, identity. B, considers but does not respect the wider character of the area. C, its design would not complement its surroundings in terms of appearance and height. And D, would not respect or reinforce the approved scheme's natural boundary treatments and as informed by placemaking, supplementary guidance and creative places policy statement. So in terms of the assessment by the Planning Service, as informed by placemaking, supplementary guidance, boundary treatments can assist in the overall sense of local character. Boundary treatments can define an area and are an active part of the public realm. As such, they require special attention in any new development's design. Identified as an edge of settlement site, the wider residential development was approved with respectful and natural settlement boundary lines, appropriate to local amenity and as biodiversity enhancement. As per the case officer's report for approved permission, reference 22-01879 FLL, it was considered that existing natural features will be retained and enhanced to help integrate the development into the landscape and enhance biodiversity. An attractive and distinct new residential development is proposed through the redevelopment of the derelict brownfield site, and together with new tree planting and landscaping, the proposal will significantly enhance the surrounding environment. Ultimately, and through extensive discussion, concerns remain due to the suburban style fencing, either as permanent or temporary designs, being erected at this sensitive edge of settlement location. The proposal would result in a significant change, albeit temporary, from the approved natural boundary treatment design. It has been argued that similar boundary treatments have already been erected throughout the wider development. Existing approved timber fencing boundaries, particularly on the northwestern corner, were approved in conjunction with stone wall and natural hedging detail as part of the wider development site's design. However, given the particular positioning of Plot 2 at the northeastern corner, it is not considered that such a development would be appropriate given its visible roadside location and the qualities and character sought through this brownfield development. Placemaking supplementary guidance expands that new developments can be prominent sites in terms of visibility, often the point of entrance into a settlement. In this instance, the subject site's boundary treatments along the northern and eastern boundary are prominently visible on approach to Grange from the east. An attractive open edge with appropriate planting was an integral part of the approved design, and as such, any new proposal deviating from the approved landscaping scheme has to be considered and assessed. The new landscaping and hedges have been previously approved as a new edge to the settlement and to help integrate the wider development into its setting. So in terms of the applicant's case, the main concern is with regard to security. When they purchased the property prior to it being built, it was not possible to see the plot for trees along the roadside. but these were removed as required by planning as they were in poor condition, resulting in a number of gaps in screening between the road and the property, permitting full view of the garden, office pod and house from the road. Cars are able to stop and look into the property or gain access into the garden as they consider they are more of a target for thieves. The increased speed limit, which allows trucks and cars to pass at nearly 60 miles an hour, makes working in the pod nearly impossible. The back garden is open to view to the road. The plan is to plant hedging and trees to screen the current gaps with the road, which would be in keeping with the rest of the garden, providing a consistent countryside look. However, this will take time to grow, which is why the erection of a temporary fence was proposed. As well as providing security and privacy, the fence would provide protection for the growing trees and hedging from wind blow. It appears that although the officer was content, senior officials were not, despite the amendments made to the proposal. There was an admission that there had not been sufficient oversight of the original landscaping plans submitted by the Good House Company. There are at least 4 houses in Grange with 6-foot fences adjacent to the road. Plot 8 of this new development is also adjacent to the road, and the originally approved plans include permission for a permanent 1.8 metre high fence along the boundary of the house with the road. So they have a secure private garden next to a 20-mile-an-hour zone, whereas the appeal site has an open, insecure, noisy garden in a 60-mile-an-hour zone. The removal of the 40-mile-an-hour buffer zone allows cars and trucks to pass and approach the entrance to the development at higher speed than before. Vehicles use this section of road as a speed track. While primarily a safety issue, it is also a noise issue for the residents adjacent to the road, impacting on mental health. Alternative treatments are suggested, including willow or hazel panels. And just to add, there isn't any condition on the original approval which removes permitted development rights. So in terms of permitted development, a fence could be erected here up to a height of 1 metre.
Thank you very much. You've answered the one question I was going to ask. It was about the permitted rights. So obviously they could erect a fence. Baillie McLaren, any questions?
I don't have any questions. Thank you. The report has been very factual and full.
Baillie Williamson?
Yes, I'm happy to proceed, and I've got some questions too. Yeah.
So, as we've got no questions, we're happy to proceed to the application for review on the basis of the information before us. That is the information contained in the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor. Or do require more information? Baillie McLaren?
Happy to proceed.
And Baillie Williamson? Happy to.
Yes, absolutely.
You jumped the gun, see? Right, members, I'll start us off on this one. It's an unusual one for us to look at. I have to say, looking at the site from the road, it looks odd at the moment with one property on the corner having a complete fence and the other one not having it. It looks out of balance to me. And it may be argued that it would look odd with this temporary fence in place just on that corner, but I don't think it'd be any more out of place than as it looks now. So on this basis, and taking the fact that obviously security and privacy is a concern for the applicants, and that it is only to be on a temporary basis, I'm happy to grant the appeal on this occasion. It is for a 5-year period to allow the landscape to take a hold. And as I say, I think with the security and privacy concerns is enough to depart from the comments of the officer on this occasion. So I'm happy to grant the appeal. I think it's also important to note for the applicants that they do have permission to permitted development rights to actually install a fence up to 1 metre high around the property. So that may be of consolation to them as well. Baillie McLaren.
Thank you, convener. You're just echoing my thoughts here. I am minded to be, well, I would support the appeal, and as you say, it's for a temporary 5-year period. It would be concerning an open garden. Security I would say that is of a concern. There's a lot of rural theft happens, so I'm happy to be agreeing with you, convener. Thank you.
Unfortunately, in this case, I'm standing on my own again, but I think that a partial fence is going to look even more out of kilter from the rest of the development. My view is that whilst, yes, I understand that the applicant has put in some beech hedging and it's not really grown, my suggestion would be to put in 1 metre high hedges, which tend to grow quite quickly, and would mitigate the need for the fence. I think even in the papers, the applicant has suggested that he could use faster growing hedging, and maybe this may be a way of negating that. My concern about installing a fence is that the fence would essentially kill off one side of the hedging, so that when the fence does come to be removed, you're going to have one bare side and one side that's grown quite well, and that's my concern. But as I say, I if it was me and I was doing the landscaping, I would be submitting or trying to get 1 metre high hedging plants installed. They're fairly quick going, a bit of manure, and off you go.
Thank you. So, Mr. Vole, we have a majority decision yet again to approve the appeal. Okay. So members will now move on to item 4.4, which is the erection of a dwelling house in principle at land 330 metres northwest of Kynaston Cottages, Leslie Glenrothes. Mr. Tierney, if you could introduce.
Thank you, convener. So just some slides here of location on the proposed plans. So application site there just to the northeast of Scotland Well.
Looks like we're back on again.
Well
Thank you.
done. Okay, so zooming in there, Scotland Well just down in the bottom left of the overhead there, and the main farm at Kynaston is kind of in the centre of the drawing there. Number of buildings, houses, other properties, farm and equestrian use. Application site up towards the top of the screen there where the yellow star is, quite a bit further up the hill from the main farm. Next slide, please. And then this is another image just showing the access off the main road, just at the left-hand side there, sweeps up the hill and then continues right up the hill to where the application site is. It's a separate access to the one just at the right-hand side there at the bottom, which goes up to the main farm complex. Next slide. The left-hand side there is the red line of the application site, so that includes the road to the site that comes off the main road. So it's quite a long road that takes you from the main road up to the application site. The blue is on that side of the road, the land in the applicant's ownership. And then on the right-hand side there, the access as it comes in along the field boundary at the top and then into the application site in the corner there in the green with the orange is the indicative footprint of the dwelling house. Next slide, please. And then this is just information that the appellant submitted, which is the blue land is the land in their ownership. And you can just make out on the left-hand side there, the red square in the middle is the application site. Next slide, please. A couple of images that they've submitted of the site with an indicative house outline shown on the site. It is actually only an application in principle, so there is no detail of the house. That's just an artist's impression of a house on the site. Next slide, please. And again, although it's an application in principle, the top slide there shows the application site on the top of the hill at the left-hand side, and then a section through the road, the woodland, where the existing farm and stables are, all the way down to the main road. And then again, just in terms of the levels on the site, how that would work with the dwelling house in terms of the levels at the bottom there. Next slide. So this is the access onto the main road, which is an existing access point to the farm. As I say, it's separate to the main access to the farm, but it is an existing access that takes you to the track up to the application site. Next slide. And then this is as you start to move away from the main road. As you can see, it's very much a track rather than a road at present. Next slide, please. And then it's moving further up the hill, back down towards the main road. Next slide. And then this is as you move across the hill in the direction of the existing farm on the left, and then on the right as you look back down towards the where the track curves back down to the main road. Next slide. And then on the left here is as you head up the hill towards the application site. On the right is effectively the opposite view where you look back down towards the main road. And then this is as you get to the application site, looking back down towards the main road. And then the fence there is where the access into the site is. Next slide. So then this is now looking across to the site as it would come off the track, and it effectively follows the line of between the trees and the fence up towards where the yellow arrow is indicating where the house would be located. So at the moment it's not it is a track, but it's not regularly used by vehicles. It is covered in grass. And then the image on the right is as you come back onto the track. Next slide. And then this is as you move further along towards where the house would be. You can probably start to make out an old stable building there. That's where the house would be located. Next slide. And then this is now from the site looking back towards the track. Next slide, please. The image on the left is just to the left of where the house would be located. You can see that track there. That would be for, well, it's the same track as on the right-hand side. One's looking down the hill, one's looking up the hill, which is obviously where they train the horses throughout the estate. Next slide, please. And then again, the one on the left just looking back along the track from the site to the access track, if you like. And then the one on the right is just where the track continues yet further up the hill. Next slide, please. Okay. So in terms of introduction, the application is for a dwelling house on an unused greenfield site at Kynaston Farm, east of Scotland Well. Indicative plans have been submitted to show a site measuring 2,439 square metres and a house plot of 199 square metres. The proposed site is situated on the mid-slopes of the south side of Munduff Hill. The nearest public road is the A911 to the south. The vehicle access to the public road network for the property will be via the existing private vehicle track running to the north of the A911. The applicant's father is looking to retire and remain on the farm in Kynaston House, and it is the intention for the proposed house to be used as the applicant's main accommodation when he succeeds his parents upon their retirement and continues the running of Kynaston Stables and Kynaston Farming Company. The reasons for refusal are firstly that the proposal does not satisfy the siting and design criteria set out in national and local planning policy for new homes in rural areas. The site lacks full enclosure and long-established natural boundaries, which separates the site naturally from the surrounding ground and is distant from the cluster of buildings on the farm, which includes the main farmhouse and other residential properties. The proposal does not respect the character and amenity of the place. It does not satisfy the requirements of NPF 4 Policy 14, Design Quality and Place, NPF 4 Policy 17, Rural Homes, and LDP 2 Policy 1, Placemaking and Associated Supplementary Guidance 2020, and LDP 2 Policy 19, Housing in the Countryside and Associated Supplementary Guidance 2020. And secondly, this is a greenfield site and it has not been allocated for development and it is not explicitly supported by policies of the Perth and Kinross LDP2. The proposal is therefore contrary to MPF 4, brownfield, vacant and derelict land and empty buildings, policy 9B. So in terms of the assessment by the Planning Service, while the LDP does cover retirement succession houses, sorry, it does not cover retirement succession houses, MPF 4 policy 17 allows single homes for the retirement succession of a viable farm holding. MPF policy 14, design quality and place, promotes well-designed development which is consistent with the 6 qualities of successful places. This aligns with LDP2 policy 1A and 1B placemaking, which states development must contribute positively to the quality of the surrounding built and natural environment. All development should be planned and designed with reference to climate change, mitigation and adaptation. The design, density and siting of development should respect the character and amenity of the place. Proposal should also incorporate new landscape and planting works appropriate to the local context and the scale and nature of the development. Also relevant is MPF 4 policy 9B, which states proposals on greenfield sites will not be supported unless the site has been allocated for development or the proposal is explicitly supported by policies in the LDP. LDP 2 Housing in the Countryside Supplementary Guidance provides further guidance and outlines proposals must demonstrate that the site chosen is the best possible option in terms of fit with the landscape and reflects the traditional pattern and character of the area. Proposals are required to demonstrate that it meets the following criteria when viewed from surrounding vantage points. It blends sympathetically with landform, it uses existing trees, buildings, slopes or other natural features to provide a backdrop. It uses an identifiable site with long established boundaries which separates the site naturally from the surrounding ground, and it will make a positive contribution to the surrounding landscape. The site is open agricultural land with a timber shed and is used for grazing horses. Mature trees on the north side of the track to the rear of the site provide a backdrop, however it lacks full enclosure and long established natural boundaries which separates the site naturally from the surrounding ground as required by the supplementary guidance. The supporting information does not fully consider other discounted sites nearer to the hub of the farm and equestrian activity. The site is located 300 metres north of the cluster of farm buildings and is distant from the hub of the farming operation. They consider there is a more appropriate site for a dwelling house closer to the cluster of farm buildings. The proposal does not demonstrate that this is the best possible option in terms of fit with the landscape, and it does not reflect the traditional pattern and character of the area. There's no supporting information to demonstrate consideration has been given to the applicant living in Scotland well, given the proximity of the settlement identified in the local plan, or to any of the other properties within the applicant's control. The use of the existing buildings has been addressed. However, in respect of the appropriateness of their location, it is noted that the current owner of the farming business resides in Kynaston House, located in the middle of the working yard, and the other 4 dwelling houses are all located within the cluster of farm buildings and working yard and occupied by people working in the farming business. The case regarding appropriateness of the location is therefore weak. The proposed site is close to the main training grounds, but is remote from the farming operation and other dwelling houses, and it is considered there are more suitable sites. In terms of the applicant's appeal, they've noted that Kynaston Farming Company manages an 800-acre mixed farm with arable grazing and forestry. Also part of this company is a well-established diversified racehorse training operation, Kynaston Stables. This business employs 21 full-time and 10 part-time staff and provides a significant income for local farriers, vets and feed merchants, and also provides income to a wide range of contractors supporting the arable and forestry operations. The father, Mr. Alexander Senior, is looking to retire and remain on the farm in Kynaston House, and a succession dwelling is required for his son. It is the intention for this dwelling to be used as the applicant's main accommodation when he succeeds his parents upon their retirement and continues the running of Kynaston Stables and Farming Company. In the pre-application process, the council did not suggest a site which would satisfy the siting criteria, but only discounted the 3 sites that were proposed by the applicant. In choosing the optimal site for the business, this involved the appellant considering not only the physical siting criteria, but also the operational criteria which would benefit the business. The proposed site is situated on the mid-slopes of the south side of Munduff Hill. The nearest public road is the A911 to the south. Due to the topography, there is no public view of the proposed site from the road. There is no intervisibility. The site is screened from the north on higher ground by a band of trees which run east to west along the lower slopes of the hill. More distant views of the site from the east are screened by woodland. There would be very low public visibility of the site from the west in distant views due to the openness and elevation of the land. The proposed design of the house will have a horizontal rather than vertical emphasis to blend sympathetically with the landform, and the materials used will look to complement the local character and the landscape in which the house is set. Along the A911 to the east, there is built development at a similar and greater height on the hill as the site at Little Arnott, Newton, Westerton and Meikle Barhomry. Operational considerations in the choice of site were important, and the building of a dwelling away from the main farmyard, which is characterised by busy horse activity and stabling, was a main consideration. The review site is advantageous as it is close to the training run to the north. The site therefore is the optimum choice for the business by trying to achieve a good landscape fit through siting and design, and a location which is operationally practical for the business. In terms of non-domestic buildings, all of these are fully used for the farm and horse training purposes, comprising stables, garages and offices. They are not available for conversion, and if they were, they would not be appropriate in terms of their scale, construction or location in the middle of the working yard. With regard to the other dwelling houses on the farm, there are currently 4 of these, and they're all occupied by people working in the farm business. Residential accommodation at West Bow House is not available for this proposal, as the permissions were sold and the money was reinvested in the Kynaston business. The applicant has stated that it would not have been possible to create the current scale of business without the proceeds from these sales.
Thank you for that. We'll go to questions. Bailey Williamson.
Yeah, I've got a question. It's about the woodlands on your cross-section map. I was just wondering if that's for arboriculture, as in that the wood's going to be sold on at a later date. I was just wondering if that's correct.
I'm not sure of the status of the woodland, Bailey Williamson, I'm sorry. I mean, it will be in their ownership, but whether it will remain on site or be sold on in the future, I'm afraid I don't know the answer to that.
Okay, and looking at the wood to the north that you said that the property would be actually hidden from, that in itself, looking at the map that's in front of us now, appears to be a commercial wooders too. So I take it at some point in time that wood may go. So therefore that negates that argument that the property may well be seen is hidden from the north, and the fact that that wood may well disappear at some point in time in the future. Is that a fair assumption?
I would say that's a fair point. If it's possible for it to be felled in the future, it will no longer form a backdrop. Yes.
Bailey McLaren.
Thank you. Excuse me if this sounds a bit silly. You referred to there had been different sites discussed with our officers, but the business has chosen this to be their optimum site. Is there ongoing discussion regarding any other possibilities of sites?
Yes, Bailey McLaren. There is actually, well, there's obviously been a lot of discussions ongoing about which site would be acceptable to planning, but there is actually another planning application pending at the moment for, let me just grab the reference for you. It is application /01195/IPL for erection of a dwelling house in principle at land 79 metres northwest of Kynaston Cottage. So in terms of the location of that site, I can tell you that it is directly adjacent to all the existing farm buildings and properties at Kynaston to their immediate west. Now, I do know that the planning service are much more content with that application, and they are minded to approve it, both in terms of the need case that's been provided and also in terms of landscape fit. But they have not determined that application yet, perhaps pending the outcome of this appeal.
Thank you. No other questions? No.
No, no other question.
I'm just going to have one. You've asked one of mine already. In NPF 4 policy 17 paragraph 6, this is the rural succession for farming. I got the impression from the appellant papers that this overrides many of the other policies that we deal with. Is that correct? Purely for farming succession, obviously. Is that correct?
I wouldn't say overrides the other policies, convener. Retirement and succession houses are not part of what's allowed within your local development plan. There is no policy that covers that. But that may not be across the board in Scotland. Some authorities possibly did have policies for retirement farmers, and it is therefore something that has come into national planning policy. So because national planning policy is a more recent document than your local development plan, it in effect adds more significant weight to a proposal complying in principle as a retirement dwelling. That has been accepted by the planning service in this case. It's the particular citing of this proposal that's causing them concern.
Thank you for that. I have no further questions, and members will then can we proceed to determine the application for the review on the basis of the information before us. That is the information contained in the papers, the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we need more information? Bailey Williamson?
No further information
And
required.
Bailey McLaren?
Happy to proceed.
And I too am happy to proceed. So Bailey Williamson, if you could lead us on this one.
Yes, thank you, convener. My decision would be to refuse the application on the grounds outlined by the officers in the papers.
Thank you for that. I'll follow you on that one. Yes, I too feel I would have to refuse the appeal. Obviously, it's a note that there is another application in place which seems to be more acceptable. Understand that obviously the rural succession here, understand the points, but the property that's proposed in this paperwork is quite away from the main hub of the farm, somewhat away from it, and it will be, I think, to some extent prominent where it stands. So I too would be refusing the appeal on this occasion. Bailey McLaren.
Yeah, thank you, convener. In light of the further information that the officers are more content with the other application that's sitting within them. I mean, I understand the need for the succession, and sometimes within the business, retiral may not be a full retiral, and the other housing units are occupied by people working within the business. That's all very positive, but equally, as is pointed out by the officers, the proposed site in this application is one that would not improve the character and amenity of the place. It lacks full enclosure. So I too, on this instance, would uphold the decision of our officers. Thank you.
Thank you for that. So Mr. Fogg, another unanimous decision for you today. Okay. And we'll move on, members, then to the last application we have before us. Is number 45. This is a review of condition 9B imposed on Planning Permission 24/00469/511, the erection of a replacement dwelling house at Riven-Swift 3 Dunsinnan Road at Wolf Hill. Had to think about that one as I did it. Mrs. Tierney, if you could introduce for us.
Thank you, convener. So location of the appeal site there at Wolf Hill. Next slide, please. And then as you zoom into the settlement of Wolf Hill, you can see the yellow star indicates the location of the site on Dunsinnan Road. And then zooming in, the yellow square there is the appeal site with the existing dwelling house at the front of the site opposite Dunsinnan, or just right next to Dunsinnan Road. And then this is the plan of the boundary of the appeal site, again with the house you can see right next to Dunsinnan Road at the front there. Next slide, please. And then on the left you have the footprint roof plan of the existing single-storey dwelling house that's on the site. And then on the right-hand side you have the footprint and roof plan of the approved house in this location. Next slide, please. These are the elevations of the existing property, single-storey, small cottage. Next slide, please. And then this is the house that's been approved in principle on the to replace the existing house on the site. Next slide, please. And then again, these are just the side elevations of the proposed dwelling. So some photographs. This is the existing house that exists on the site. Next slide. And then on the left-hand side there, again, you can see the property. And then as you look along the road, some of the other properties on Dunsinnan Road. The image on the right is looking back towards the cottage. It's behind that tree there at the side of the road. Next slide, please. These are the images of the back garden of the property, just for context. Next slide. This is a view from the back of the property. The boundary of it bounds onto an area of open space in the middle of Wolf Hill. So there's a dwelling house on the right-hand side. The house is in the middle there, albeit you can't really see it because it's just single story and it's further away towards the road. And then on the left-hand side, another couple of dwelling houses. Next slide, please. Now, these are the couple of dwelling houses that are next door, fairly new houses that have been granted permission. And you can see the two garages for these properties at the back of them there, set back from the houses. Next slide, please. And then this is the rear view of the two houses, and then the garages at the back of the site there. Next slide. Just some other images of other properties to give you a bit of context. That's a public building on the left-hand side, the hall, I believe. Most of the other properties are residential, although I'm not sure if the one on the right is, but effectively a crossroads, and all these houses run along from the intersection of the crossroads. Again, a single-storey cottage on the corner towards the south, and then this is looking back up that track again with the single-storey houses on the right-hand side. Next slide. A newer development just round the corner from the application site. Some newer houses to the east. Those are all more single-storey properties. Next slide. And then this is further along Dunsinnan Road, just the other houses that exist. And then the one on the right-hand side there is maybe a couple of fields distance away from the application site. A larger property with an attached garage on the side. Here. So this appeal concerns the removal of one part of condition 9 on the approval for the replacement house. As you've seen, it's a small single-storey cottage, and the approval is for the house to be replaced with the much larger dwelling with accommodation over 2 levels. There was obviously some design changes and so on that were made prior to the planning service approving the application, and there was a bit of history of refusals on the site before in terms of overall design, but there is permission there now for the replacement house, with a condition to do with the dormers and requiring the garage to be separate from what's been approved and further back within the site to stop it being so dominant at the roadside. In terms of the wording of the condition, the proposed dormer design on the south elevation and the detached garage are not approved. Prior to the commencement of the development, hereby approved amended elevations, floor plans, roof plan and a block plan which show A, traditional dormers with pitched roofs, and B, a detached garage set back from the dwelling shall be submitted to and approved in writing by the council as planning authority. The approved details shall thereafter be implemented in full, with the reason being to ensure that the development does not introduce an incongruous feature into the local area. The assessment by the planning service, when they determined the replacement house application, as I said, several changes were made to improve the overall design. However, they considered those two particular areas still required to be addressed. They felt the flat roof dormers were visually awkward, not traditional looking, and would look incongruous in the street scene. More traditional pitched roof dormers would be far more appropriate. The attached garage is large and is close to the dwelling house, and that results in a cumulative massing, which would also be awkward looking within the street scene. A better approach would be to detach the garage and set it back into the plot, which would help reduce the overall mass of the frontage. So the applicant has appealed that particular part of the condition. They accept that they will revise the dormer design under clause 9A, but they've obviously got issues with the clause 9B requiring the garage to be detached and set back from the house. The reasons being the garage supports their ecological and sustainable design provisions, as it includes the solar panels at roof level, significant sustainable heat source plant and equipment accommodated within the garage, with supply pipe work requiring local access from the garage into the new dwelling. Concessions have been made in the design by setting the garage and dwelling further back from the road in order to reduce the impact of the new works on the street view. The scheme shall optimise efficiencies and sustainability due to the avoidance of constructing two separate structures and supply ducting to the new dwelling. The majority of the properties, with the exception of perhaps only two in Wolf Hill, have garages which are attached and integrated into the dwellings and consequently have set a precedent design principle. The aesthetics are enhanced by integrating the garage within the dwelling structure, and it does not have any adverse effect on the character of the village or the surrounding area. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll move on to questions. Bailey McLaren, any questions?
I don't have any questions, convener.
Bailey Williamson.
I don't have any questions either.
And I don't have any questions either, so that makes it easier. We'll move on straight then to the debate. Members, can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us? That is, the information contained in the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we need more information? Bailey McLaren.
Happy to proceed.
And Bailey Williamson.
Happy to proceed.
And I too am happy to proceed. So Bailey McLaren, if you could kick off on this one.
Thank you. I'll just be brief. I actually support the officer's decision. The garage, the addition of an attached garage would create a large dominant property, and the massing, the combined massing would create that. So I would uphold the officer's decision and refuse.
Thank you for that. Bailey Williamson.
I too would like to refuse as well on basically the same grounds as Bailey McLaren's just outlined. I believe the structure would be quite imposing with the garage attached, and support the officer's decision.
Thank you for that. Just as well in the last case, I'm going to be different. I would uphold the appeal personally. I know it's now a minority decision for me, but I think the property is substantial anyway, and I think just removing the garage would be very little benefit. I think it's a big property anyway, and the garage is just part of it. But I appreciate, so I would uphold the appeal, but I appreciate I'm now in the minority. So, Mr. Falk, we have a majority decision on this one to refuse the appeal. Okay.
Yes, convener. I wonder, just before, given that there's no other business, could I take you all back to application 4.3, which is the erection of the fence for a temporary period, which, as you know, was upheld on a 2-to-1 split. I'm remembering that in the representations, there was one from Transport Planning saying that they did not have details with the application of the visibility display, I wonder if you would confirm, for the purposes of the minute, that it would be appropriate for the consent to be issued with a pre-commencement condition whereby details showing the proposed visibility display of the fencing such that visibility onto the C484 is not obstructed be incorporated as part of the approval.
I'd be happy with that, yes.
Happy to, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, convener.
Thank you very much. That then brings us to the end of the meeting today. All that remains for me to do is thank my colleagues and all other parties here today for your input. And we'll see you on the next meeting. Thank you very much.